Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today with Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
Good. Are you prepared to spend more of your money and send it to the administration?
I hope
Or are we going to get more money back?
I want
Our taxes are going to go down?
I like money.
More money. Well, we'll find out. You know, there's going to be a major speech, and the president's to talk about how the union's doing. But, you know, I keep thinking the State of the Union, it implies some good, you know, a good intention. But sometimes what I want to hear is the state of the republic. Yeah. Do we have a republic or do we have an authoritarian government? Most people have within the union, the idea of a union, a lot of authoritarian things, interventionism. And, but it's good to think about this, but I'm sure tomorrow morning and even late tonight, there'll be a lot of talk about this. And the enemies of Trump will certainly point out, oh, he said this once before, and now he's changed this. But there's going to be challenges because Trump, I think, has come out as a very optimistic person. He's very positive, and I think people like that. But the whole thing is the pretense that we can solve all the problems of the last 10, 20, 30 years because they're built in. Inflation is built in, the foreign policy is built in, the intervention, the attack on our civil liberties and free speech, that has been there. And you're not going to be able to get rid of it real fast. So he's going to, you know, have to dance around that a little bit. And I guess the bottom line will be, what did it do to the polls? You know, polls are important, at least for an hour or two. And the hours say, well, he got himself into trouble here. But ultimately, it takes a little bit longer than that. I guess the first speech, when Biden gave his first speech, people, what's going on here? Yeah. But that was downhill from there. But, you know, so I'm interested in listening to this because Trump is very positive and he's a problem solver and he's a confident person and people like that. I happen to think our problems are very, very big. And I've always tried to follow the principle of not fibbing. You know, you have a problem, but end up with a positive note. Yes, it's horrible, but the problem is not that difficult, you know, solving it if the people are just willing to go along with it. So there's lots of activity going on there, and there'll be a lot of media promotions tonight. And I imagine a lot of speculation for the afternoon on what he might say.
Yeah. Well, one thing, thankfully, we will not see tonight. I don't think. I could be wrong. We won't see Nancy Pelosi tearing up his speech like she did last time. Remember, that was a low point in American history, I think, when she did that. That was just awful. So here's what Trump tweeted out. I think this is on his Truth Social. What he put out yesterday, his anticipation. Tomorrow night will be big. I will tell it like it is. So there is the promise here. But, you know, we wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what we think he might say, what we think he should say. And so we narrowed it down to a few topics. And something that's in the news today is tariffs. He announced new tariffs, and he probably will talk about those tonight. So I found a fascinating video that we'll put up, and it shows Trump on Fox News announcing the tariffs, and you can see the Dow ticker in real time, and you can see what's happening in the stock market when he announces this. So let's cue up that first video. Put on your earpiece, Dr. Paul, if you will, and we'll screen that and have a look. Now watch it, that ticker over there on the right when he mentions tariffs.
But so we're going April 2nd, but very importantly, tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll start. So they're going to have a tariff. So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariff.
You saw that go down in real time as he said tariffs.
Right. You know, you brought up interesting subject, Pelosi, and how she was giving a talk the other day, and she had the nerve to lecture the people and her Democratic friends. We should be dignified and orderly and not stupid. Anything. And I got to think, well, you mentioned it was so bad that that I think, but the amazing thing was she up there was lecturing
Yeah,
people how
of all
to
people.
how to have a proper decorum on the House floor.
So what do you think about that market reaction to the announcement of tariffs? That's pretty dramatic, don't you think?
Boy, that is for sure. And of course, that helps settle some of the dispute. But tariffs are hard to predict on the short run or all inclusive. Sometimes a tariff will help, and sometimes it's short lived, and sometimes it lasts a long time. Basically, though, I like to make it simple. Tariffs are taxes. I don't like taxes, and the consumer has to pay them.
Yeah.
And but protectionism is bred into the system. That is why the British finally went off mercantilism. It's because of wage and price control, and they repealed the corn laws, and it ushered in the age of modern economics back then. So I just don't like them. It's authoritarian, and they say, well, we'll only do it to the people that are being unfair and that sort of thing. But I don't know. I think I don't like inflation because it interferes with prices. It distorts the inflation rate, and distorts all this activity. So if you have tariffs coming in there, and they don't know what the reactive tariff will be, what's going to be the reactiveness by the country you put it on, and then it becomes war, and what will it lead to? Or Trump's capable of adjusting his speech without changing his tone. So you might see them. Maybe even today's news might make him say, well, explain it a little bit better.
I think he was talking about 25% tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada, if I'm not mistaken. So that'll have a big effect. And that after a couple of weeks ago, he said, no, I'm not going to do that on Canada and Mexico. If you guys close your border, they said, okay, we'll close our border. Now it looks like he's going to do it after all. It's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, we'll find out. I don't think it can be a positive. It can't be a positive for the republic and markets and our prosperity, but it'll be a hot political issue.
Now, here's the thing that he explains, though, when he's talking about it, and he posted this on Truth Social. If you put that second clip on. Now, I want to see what you think about this, Doctor. He did this last night. If companies move to the United States, then there are no tariffs. So does that make sense, do you think?
It makes sense on the short run to a couple people, but so what are they going to say when they do that, subsidize a newcomer, and it's controversial? And what if it hurts a company that's already been here, working their company out for 20 years and finally build, and they cut into that territory? Yeah, the government decision making, government planning is not good. Yeah. It's not that their heart isn't in the right place, but it's so narrow in the sense. Well, if you give them this, everything will be okay. Yeah. People need more money. We'll print it.
Yeah. Exactly.
This sort of thing. Oh yes, there's people fighting. We don't like war. We better go there and end it. We'll bomb them.
Yeah. Or when people need more eggs, you can't just print them, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the second one, we thought he'll obviously we will be talking about the economy quite a bit. There are concerns that persistent inflation, it's affecting his poll numbers. And I just dug this up from the Hill, but there's plenty of stuff out here. This is something based on new polls. Put that first one up. Trump economic approval ratings sag as inflation fears grow. And this is at the beginning of this month, a couple of days ago. Go to the next one. It's a new Gallup poll. According to February Gallup polling, 42% of Americans are giving a thumbs up to Trump's economic stewardship, while 54% are giving him a thumbs down. Approval of Trump's handling of the economy also fell to 39% from 43% in polling released last week by Reuters Ipsos. This is notably a lower mark compared to the start of Trump's first term in 2017, when his economic approval rating stood at 53%. While this could reflect less enthusiasm about the economy more generally, it is also a notable thing to watch for the president's term. They do add that the Hill is obviously not for a Trump publication. Keep that up, please. Thank you. Trump does still rank well above former President Biden on the economy. They do add that. Biden left with a 34%. So clearly it looks that persistent inflation is harming the president's approval rating.
Yes, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about inflation. And sometimes people see if there is an emergency, a weather emergency or hurricanes, prices go up, and they call that inflation. It isn't. Inflation is when the Federal Reserve is compelled to print money to satisfy the politicians in their collusion to maintain the deep state and make them all wealthy. And that's harder, a little bit harder to explain. And they getting together and get people to do it. But the number I watch the most closely, because I think it's dependable, is what's the Congress doing? Because they're reflecting the people. The Congress, right now, the Congress and the Trump administration, they're standing up, and the people are going with them.
Yeah.
But what are we hearing now, incessantly now, are let's say 60% or 70% know and understand what he's saying, and we have to cut. But there's a lot of pressure going on, and that is what that makes a difference. But the Republicans aren't exactly pure, even though they give a better argument for the free market and sound money. But here it's they do this, and what's the first bill they passed? The budget bill. We're in trouble. We didn't spend all this money, but we have to spend some in order to get us out of trouble. And if we lower taxes, we're going to have a boom in the economy, and it's going to pay for it. We'll worry about that later. But right now, we have to have more money. And that is what they're saying, is we have to have more inflation. So they pass a $4 trillion increase in the debt limit in 1 year. Oh boy. So I would think that people who are looking beyond the next week, business finances, they might say, well, maybe it's impossible. They're well intended, but I think that $4 trillion is admission that with all these efforts and many benefits coming from this attack on waste and fraud and inefficiency, is not that looks. Right now, I don't think the American people believe it's going to stop inflation. Matter of fact, they look like there's going to be more inflation. And of course, many people in the population have had a little experience with tariffs, and tariffs are inflationary.
Yeah.
It doesn't lower prices.
Well, I'm glad you said, what is Congress doing? Because that's important. And I came across something literally as we were about to hit the show starting. It's someone that we watch closely. This is a bonus clip exactly about what Congress is doing. And this is a post that was put up by Senator Rand Paul. And this is a 6-part. I'm just going to read the first 2 because I think it's interesting. This is exactly what you're saying. So Senator Paul starts by saying, you would think that the revelations concerning the State Department paying for trans operas, comic books, and such would shame Congress into reducing foreign aid. Then he continues, but watch your congressperson closely. In a matter of days, Congress will vote to continue foreign aid at current levels for another year. What an insult to the American taxpayer. This is what people aren't paying attention to. Everyone's looking at DOGE. That's great. But this is where the rubber hits the road.
And that means the size of government will grow in spite of all these efforts. But the efforts in the past have been made, but I kept my fingers crossed and was hopeful that the determination this time to cut. And remember, at the beginning of all this attack on waste and fraud, they even supported my position, do away with all foreign aid.
Yeah.
And they said, that sounds like a good idea. But here we are. The real thing is what they're doing, those kind of votes there.
Yeah.
Well, we'll start with $4. If they're getting $4 trillion, there's nothing to say. We haven't even had the major emergency yet. There's going to be an emergency before the end of this year. There always will be. The emergency is always there's not enough money.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Taxpayer.
Yeah. Well, let's speculate a little bit on Ukraine. There's been a dramatic week. We talked about it yesterday. Zelensky came to town. It didn't go very well. Then he went to the UK, and I guess it went well. I don't know. And Trump is still floating this deal. He signed the minerals deal, which we've been skeptical about because it further entangles us in a relationship with Ukraine, which is the last thing we want to do. We want to disentangle. So we don't know what the president's going to say. Zelensky, now I read this before we started, he's already backing down. I'm eager to work under President Trump, what have you. But now here's something that President Trump said last night. This is going to be an audio clip, and he's talking about Zelensky's seeming hesitancy in making a deal. You want to put your might want to put your earpiece in, Dr. Paul. This is a short clip of the president talking about the implications for Zelensky if he refuses to make a deal and to talk. Let's go ahead and hear it.
Very fast. Now, maybe somebody doesn't want to make a deal. And if somebody doesn't want to make a deal, I think that person won't be around very long. That person will not be listened to very long because I believe that Russia wants to make a deal. I believe certainly the people of Ukraine want to make a deal. They've suffered more than anybody else. We talk about.
That's a pretty pointed threat. If you don't want to make a deal, you're not going to be around for long.
That's for sure. You know, that whole thing that's going on and coming and signing up a deal on how to divvy up on the rare earth metals. This to me is in the foreign policy. It's always been there. What are we going to benefit if we win this war? You know, in natural resources, but it's been more open this time, and Trump is not bashful about this. You know, there's oil in Syria. You know, we have to deal with it, and now Ukraine evidently is one of those potential areas that could be a wonderful, wonderful country. You know, under the natural resources, but they got mixed up. There was a competition for the type of government that they wanted, and they certainly had to put up with the attack on communism, and maybe that's the reason why some of them are still leery of Russia. But they sometimes wanted to settle with a sort of a fascist system instead of the communist system. And here they have all these wonderful resources. But the outsiders, you know, whether it's all the way back to World War I and World War II, and what part of the world was divvied up afterwards, and it had a lot to do with these resources. And the planners sitting down, well, we'll draw new lines here, and we'll make sure it's fair, and everybody will be. They have the right of self-determination and all that nonsense. And then they end up just setting the stage for the next big war. And it looks like some people would just as soon start this next big war. I hope enough brains are left where they realize that the policies aren't very good.
Yeah, I'm still confused about this whole minerals deal, because The Economist even came out with a report earlier this week saying there's really not a lot of minerals and they're really not worth that much in Ukraine. So I don't know what the big hoopla is. If it's some sort of I mean, the whole thing seems like a chimera. It doesn't seem like the reality. So I don't know what the whole thing's about. Maybe it's to get him to visually capitulate to Trump's will, but it seems strange to me. Now, the next one, this is the wild card. This is the wild card of what Trump may say. This is the outside edge of the possibility, but one I think that we would welcome. Now, this is an account on X. This is not a government account, but they call themselves U.S. Homeland Security News. Go back to the previous one, please. So here's speculation. Alert. Unconfirmed reports that President Trump will announce that the U.S. is leaving NATO in his joint address to the U.S. Congress tomorrow. This would be the greatest news in modern history, says U.S. Homeland Security News on X. What do you think the chances of him saying that are going to be?
Less than 50-50.
Yeah, that's still pretty good.
Yeah, that would be pretty neat. But and then you think about how can they? Where's this pressure come from?
Yeah,
prevent this from happening. But the Europeans are pretending that the Americans are leaving us. We better start our own NATO. And who knows, something like that. In currencies, that can happen. One country like the British and now America, they throw their weight along with a strong currency, and then eventually they have to change. In a foreign policy, that's the case too. There's a limit on the foreign policy. Most of the time, it's a limit on spending and the ability to do it, and having the people put up with it. Once they discover that when you spend a lot of money in Ukraine, you might push up the price of bread here in this country, and maybe we shouldn't be there. And now I think it's just great that they're tying in a NATO, because that just sort of makes everybody, responsible. They have to go together. You're in a group, and they always overplay this thought that there's an absolute thing. If they ever decide that there's to be a war, that there's nothing that you can do about it. But but we've gone along with it. We've usually led the charge. But the truth is if the European countries, members of NATO, start something, if the Congress of the American people said, no, we're not going to do it, there's no way they could make people do it. So, but there's a group of people, the people who like globalism and like this guy, type of a management of all the countries come together, and they feel very powerful, and they wield a lot of power. But I think why it's exciting but very dangerous. We're going through the early transition of how do you adjust to a total bankruptcy of a very, very wealthy country, and the adjustment period is going to be difficult. But because who's going to admit and say, we're bankrupt, and we just can't do this. We have to change. And then there wouldn't be have Rand stand up like it's astounding. They're going to vote for more foreign aid after all that talk. That should be the easy one.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll just do one more here. Now, this is something that Trump, I think he said this morning, and it raises a few issues. I don't know if he's going to talk about. We don't know. We're speculating, but this is something that he put out that's gotten a lot of attention. So he said, all federal funding will stop for any college, school, or university that allows illegal protests. Agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested. No masks. Thank you for your attention to this matter. What do you make of this, Dr. Paul?
I think this is typical of what happened. We get involved in doing something we shouldn't be doing, interventionism overseas, and us throwing our weight around and giving people money, and they have to do what we tell them, and everything seems to be okay. But then when it comes along and they do things that we don't like, and then we have to punish them, so we have to take that away. But why did they take it away? Why did we give it to them? If you're going to give them the money, you're losing control of it. It's morally and constitutionally and everything else. We give away our authority. It's our money. So what do? They say, well, we'll do this. And even they said illegal protests. American students will be permanently expelled. I mean, it's the whole thing. So it's like my first comment is, I would say, Mr. President, I agree with you. We should stop that immediately. I'm delighted you're doing that. But we should concentrate always on the origin. The origin was a long time ago, but it was really put into the legal code when we had, and I was part of the vote that voted, the smaller part of the vote that voted against it under Carter, voting for the Department of Education when it was unified. But I've heard people in the current administration say this should be an easy one. We're not going to cut a thing. We're just going to say, here, the states, you take care of it, and that's it. And the federal government be out of it. Then you wouldn't have this kind of stuff, because it's impossible, because it's a sort of a trap. Because the first thing is what I want to vote against that. He wants to stop all federal funding for these terrible, terrible people. Sure, they should be stopped. But what they're doing is that is a result of the mistake by giving them the money in the first place. And then what if they start doing other things and they're regulating freedom of speech? So I like to start at the beginning and say, don't give them the money in the first place, and and then you don't have this contest between trying to clean up something you've actually created. Foreign policy is a lot like that in a way.
Yeah, the federal government shouldn't have so much leverage over what universities do. Some may be more generous in how they have protests, and some may not. The others may not be. It does raise some concerning issues, though, because this is sort of the question is, what is an illegal protest? Is it if you have a protest and you start whacking people upside the head? Well, that's already illegal. You already go to jail for doing that. I suspect it's also an attempt to crack down on speech that people around Trump don't like, criticism of Israel, for example. And so in that way, this is sort of a right-wing wokeism that everyone who happens to criticize the government of Israel is somehow anti-Semitic or what have you. So I sense this, and I think you're right. The solution is don't have any government money. I mean, who are the Hillsdale and Grove City, I think. I don't know if they're still that way, but they just don't take government money. So they don't have anything to worry about if they want to let people go protest or whatever they want to do.
But the large majority of people, then they say, well, the cost of education has gone up. Subsidize something, you get more of it, and so they run out of money. Well, the kids just don't have enough money, so we'll loan them the money.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good idea. We won't just pay for everything. We'll just loan, make them pay back until the bill gets to us. They don't have any money. Oh, okay. We'll forget it. We won't collect any money from them. We'll cancel that debt.
Yeah.
So it's the beginning of these things that has to be looked at, no matter how clear cut it seems. That if you do this, take that money and stomp it, it doesn't answer it. How do we get ourselves into that mess?
Yeah.
And most of the time it's done with sometimes good intentions, and sometimes with humanitarian instincts, and sometimes it's done with pure confusion, and sometimes it's done with maliciousness of promoting a political philosophy that is detestable.
Yeah.
And you put it all together and you end up with a mess. That's why people should make their own decisions. Most of these decisions should be made by families and local community. And at the worst part, let the states deal with it, But to have the federal government. So when I heard the people in the administration talking about this, it sounded to me like this is one that they ought to be able to do. Just cut it off, eliminate it.
Yeah.
And you're not saying, no, I'm not closing down anything. We're just here, and then all those programs, if the states won't fund it and they don't want it, good, do what they ever want. But it's a problem that's going to be around for a while, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question, are you going to watch the speech?
Reluctantly. Well, no, let me do it. What I do is I try to, but then sometimes, I don't last the whole night.
Get a little tense.
I will at times afterwards like to hear, or I feel compelled to try to listen to the pundits afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, what did I think about this? Oh, I'll listen to this guy. He'll tell me what I'm supposed to think.
Well, I'll do a hat tip to Elon. I'll probably watch clips on his X and see which one are the juiciest clips, and maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow. I'm going to close out and put on that last clip, reminding everyone, get those tickets, come out and see us. As you can see from today's show, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're not partisan in any way. We're going to look at all three, good, bad, and ugly, at our conference on March 22nd down here in Lake Jackson. So get those tickets. I will put a link in there. If I forget to put a link in there, just go to ronpaulinstitute.org. It's at the top of the page. So we'll hope to see you there. Back to you, Dr. Paul.
Oh, wonderful. And I, too, want to encourage our viewers to consider very seriously coming to the conference. And that is where we have the most fun, spreading ideas. And that's the most important thing, is to do that. And if once an individual gets to this point where they say, I think this freedom business is a pretty good idea, and that if you're looking for peace and prosperity, we ought to pursue it. We ought to see what the founder says about peace and prosperity and freedom. And that is, of course, not complex, but it's a very big issue. And I think everybody has a responsibility, voluntarily, of course, to spread this message, because it will make all the difference in the world. It was a tremendous thing for our founders to establish and use it and write the Constitution, but it has a lot of holes in right now. There were defects at the beginning, but those holes are very, very much in a defect. They're defective, and it is up to us to spread the message. It is not complex. Just let people know that there's a natural law that says, naturally speaking, people know they're not supposed to lie, cheat, steal, or kill. If everybody followed that rule, guess what we would have? Peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.